You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey guys, welcome. This week on Myopia Defended Childhood, we'll revisit You Only Live Twice, a racist movie. Yeah, so, this isn't exactly Sean's proudest moment, but it's still a pretty good one. I guess there's no really bad bonds, but you'll hear us get into it. Anyway, so hopefully the audio is a little better. I'm doing the best I can with what I got. And from here, we'll see how everything kind of cracks out, sounds, feels, etc. So thanks for those of you who have been listening to these summer rewinds. Hopefully you're sharing us. I want to keep growing over the summer. I'm trying to do some summer projects. And, you sharing us and reviewing us helps. We have, about 50 reviews. I'd love to see more, but I'm happy with those supporters that we have. If you're around this summer in Atlanta, we'll be at Atlanta Comic Con with Cineprog. And of course, in August, we return to normal shows. August, September, October, of course. Other than that, thanks.
Hey, pardon the interruption, but do you want to learn more about love, lust, sex, anger, happiness, music, time, space, and the human race? I hope you do, because I'm here to beg you to listen to Soul Forge Podcast. We're your weekly dose of life and living here on the ESO Network. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts, and soulforgepodcast.com. A proud partner of the Rusted Robot Podcast here on the ESO Network. Let's find out together.
Name. And love is a stranger who'll beckon you on.
Welcome to Mission Briefing. This week, we're watching You Only Live Twice from 1967, Sean Connery and James Bond's fifth movie. So before we get too far into this movie, which is a baffling, just pure baffling movie, where Bond fights Blofeld sort of directly, and a guy named Soha with his chemicals and rockets. We should talk about the cold open as we follow the Bond plot. Do you want to try describing this cold open?
Yeah, I loved it. So the cold open was, it starts off and we're following some U.S. astronauts, and they're just kind of floating around in orbit. And they're in a Jupiter spacecraft, and it looks lovely. And they're communicating with Mission Control, and suddenly something shows up on the radar, and no one's really clear on what it is yet. And so we sort of pan out, and it turns out to be an ominous sort of mysterious vessel approaching, which has these crazy hatch doors that sort of open up, and it completely engulfs the U.S. vessel, and we never hear from them again. And that's kind of where we leave off, is just this mysterious spaceship has eaten a spaceship. Tensions are high. This is like the Cold War. So, of course, we're going to go ahead and blame Russia, naturally. And then that's where James Bond comes in.
Well, and as our newest panelist mentioned, like a good Bond movie where you have no idea what's going on until the title sequence, our cold open is over. So, Steve, our newest panelist, will you tell us a little bit about where Bond fits into your movie lexicon?
Oh, gosh. So Bond fits into my movie lexicon. So my father and I, grew up watching Bond films together. So, I've always had a soft spot for, maybe that's where my soft spot for, British movie and television came from. But, he was always kind of the epitome of just an an enigma, but also a badass, and just he can do anything he wants, whenever he wants, get any woman he wants. And you know, that's something you want to bond over your dad with, right? Like, this guy's awesome. We both want to be this guy. So
literally bond over bond.
yeah, we're bonding over Bond, exactly. So that's
It's a name and an action.
Yes.
it is. That's indeed true. But I have to admit, I didn't really start watching Bond films until Pierce Brosnan, because I'm
That age.
not old.
Yeah.
Sorry, old people.
Do you remember what your first Bond movie was? Was it Goldeneye?
I think it may have been Goldeneye was the one that left the biggest impression, and that may have been because of the video game. But
Yeah.
That's how a whole
it
generation
was
of people lose.
it may have been Goldfinger, but it may have been
One of the gold ones.
one of the gold ones for
Man
sure.
with the golden gun.
Exactly.
Well, very good. And as you guys heard, our third panelist tonight is John.
Hello.
Welcome back. So yeah, what did you think of the cold open? I loved it.
It was ominous in the way you want a cold open to be. It showed you just enough to know kind of what's going on in the plot, but left enough questions that you think, only one man can save the day. Space Bond.
It is Justice League of Europe.
Oh, no, we get to Space Bond later.
We do get to Space Bond. And he gets this close to being Space Bond.
This is Ninja Bond.
But
Sorry.
it's as though the director's like, you're not Roger Moore. You don't get to actually go into space. I do want to say, though, this gets us to the new level of special effects in this movie because the space capsule that they attack is a Gemini space capsule. This movie is 1967. It's 2 years before we actually land on the moon, so they're well on their way. That space capsule looks great. It is hovering over a black outline, which is great, and then a lumpy Earth, which is clearly spinning and doesn't look good.
That's fine.
And then this metal ship comes up that looks like it's a metal shark or something, and it swallows the capsule whole. It's weird.
It's weird, but it's all kind of got the same level of clunkiness, and it really kind of feels seamless, despite being awkward, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's got that kind of old horror film, gritty, ominous feel.
Roger Corman.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like, you feel like you're in space at this point because there's very little music, and it's just sort of this ominous presence. I loved it.
Well, I agree with you, and it's something that when Neil deGrasse Tyson talks, I think he misses the point on. It's the kind of thing when you as a person, hell, me as a younger person, see, I immediately understand what it's doing, even if the science doesn't make sense. You don't need to have an engineer guy on the ground saying, yes, now swallow the ship. It doesn't make sense scientifically, but you understand the point of it. We don't understand the plot Blofeld has or why he's doing it, but we understand what the space fish thing is doing. Space octopus.
Space Jaws.
That's right.
Yes.
We understand the repercussions of this nonsense, but we'll get there.
And it looks cool. And they keep
That's the
cutting.
important thing, really. It looks good.
And again, the people on the ground are freaking out because there's an unidentified object flying towards the space shuttle, right? And and they're trying to figure out what it is. They're picking up on radar. A guy in a Hawaiian shirt is yelling in a vaguely European/American accent. They cut a guy loose into space, which is terrifying when the jaws close and the guy doing the spacewalk.
Yeah.
That was actually the scariest part of the movie. And so spoilers, this happens again to a Russian spacecraft, and no astronauts are stranded in the making of that scene. So that was a little uplifting.
Yeah.
Well, and this part really that's what makes it so creepy, because you're like, later on, you're like, wait, why are there only 3 astronauts in this holding cell? Oh, that's right, one just dies. He ups and dies.
Except he didn't. He was just left floating.
Yes.
We don't know if he died or not, or if he
Oh,
lived
he
out
did.
his days.
He did.
Well,
around.
and again, this scene is so cool in the direction because it's clearly a miniature, but the miniature looks so good. It's what you miss about a world that's all CGI, right? Because when it's all CGI, they would have made it much more articulated, but it would have looked fake. This is clearly like a moving thing that all of a sudden goes limp and floats away. You're just like, oh, he's
It's
fucking
perfect.
dead.
Yeah, because it has to obey physics, right? Because it's a real thing they've made. It's perfect.
They might not be space physics, but damn it,
That's right. There's some kind of physics.
And movie physics. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we cut and we go to our cold open, or sorry, our theme song, our title sequence. Nancy Sinatra sings "You Only Live Twice."
They couldn't get her father.
They couldn't get her father.
They
for
did.
such
They
a
offered.
reason.
He turned it down. So
Did he
that's
really?
it's actually true. Yeah,
Oh, they just wanted a Sinatra.
they did. Frank turned it down. So I don't know if they offered it to Nancy or she just said, "Hey, I'm going to pick it up." But
Or Frank goes, "You asked one of the Sinatras. It doesn't matter which one you get."
that's right.
Pow.
I don't know enough of her career to know whether or not she was actually a thing at this point.
I think she was the thing later because she does have a few singles, but it's mainly probably using her father's mafia connections,
Which totally didn't exist. Right?
Yeah, which no. He just was friends with Italians with awkward names.
Yeah.
In Vegas.
Didn't he sing at one of Al Capone's gatherings? I'm sure that happened once or twice or a dozen times.
He just liked families,
Yeah.
whether they were the five families or regular family. So in the Blu-ray, they're nipples. I don't know if there were on the screen when it was 35 millimeter.
Not that I'm looking at every opening that we're seeing now in Blu-ray, but yes.
Yes, it's not subtle.
It wasn't subtle, no.
And it's all the worse because essentially everything is black, and then the silhouettes show lava, and so all of a sudden it's brightly colored silhouette, and it's not. Yeah, no, it's not subtle at all. Oh, by this point she had already had one number 1 hit, which was "These Boots Were Made for Walking,"
Okay.
which was 66, and this came out in 67.
Okay.
But yeah, the song was meh.
The song was meh. The intro was solid. It was very hypersexualized, but kind of sort of subtle, but not really. I mean, you've got these things that look like nipples. You've got lava and, eruptions of love, obviously.
may not be nipples. For science, we're going to have to rewatch.
That's right.
And the vaguely Japanese-themed, like, umbrella.
Yeah,
and the women with the done-up hair that look like geishas. And I think, again, this is a case where the directing is better than the actual song.
Well, this was a new director, wasn't it?
Yes.
I forget what his name is, but
I'm sure we could look it up.
He also went on to direct several Bond.
Yeah, this is the first of his Bond films.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the musical number is directed by another person, but it felt here like it belonged. And we were talking as the movie was queuing up. I didn't remember almost anything about this movie. For some reason, this is not one I could pick out of a crowd. But then all of a sudden, they were like, there was lava, and I'm like, oh, this is the one with the volcano. Yeah, that's the one.
This is the one that sticks out because I think I've mentioned this in or at least in Myopia. I don't know if I've mentioned it here.
Yeah.
But when my dad and I went to go see GoldenEye in theaters, Bond flies over a caldera, basically, and there's a lake at the bottom.
Yeah.
My dad nudged me, and he said, there's a base at the bottom of that.
There absolutely
Because of this movie. And
Yeah.
every time I see that, I'm like, you only live twice. There's got to be a base. There's always a base.
It's actually interesting. This movie kind of felt like a bridge between sort of cliches of old and kind of driving their own path, because it kind of felt like they reached a lot for the cliches, and you got the scene where Henderson's handing Bond the drink, and he says, "Oh, this is shaken, not stirred. Is that correct?" And you kind of have those throw-ins.
Stirred, not shaken.
Yeah, he gets it wrong.
Yeah, he gets it wrong.
He gets
Exactly.
it wrong. And Bond's like, okay.
Fair enough.
Russian vodka, very good.
Exactly. But then they're sending the precedents on sort of secret bases and all these sort of things that you see in later films. So I felt
And
like
alternate armies too.
And alternate armies.
and ninja armies, exactly.
yeah.
It was a great kind of weird segue between the first 4 films, and then you see these elements come back up in the new ones.
It's
as
almost
well.
like they figured out the pacing they want, or what the parts that they want out of Goldfinger, and they just kept taking that and expanding on it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Was this the one right after Goldfinger?
No, this is the one after Thunderball.
This is the one after Thunderball. Well, yeah. Let's just ignore Thunderball. And they figured out what they wanted in Goldfinger, and they
That's
said, "Let's
right.
do that again.
Let's do that again.
Just bigger.
That made a lot of money. Let's do that again.
Well, and and this is the first of 3 movies this guy's going to direct. And if you put your money down, you'd get one of the other ones right, because he directs Moonraker,
That's right. That's right.
which is Thunderball in space.
This is our spaceman.
Yeah, this is our space guy. Considering everything else it seems that he directed was small movies with friends, including one called 7 Nights in Japan. I wonder why he wanted to film in Japan. Yeah. Friends, Paul and Michelle, The Friends, The Adventures. Yeah, no, we're not.
Like the
we're
show
done.
Friends or the
Oh
movie
my God!
Friends?
Can you imagine a version of Friends with Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Pierce?
I think that's called Archer.
That's funny.
Brilliant.
We're so clever. So, you guys have been listening to the podcast, I hope. Otherwise, we're talking to ourselves, which is sad.
We do that anyway.
Yeah, well, yeah. We're friends in real life. It's cute. Okay, this is random, but during the opening segment, the guy from, I guess he was supposed to be from Houston, who pronounced it Houston because
Houston?
he
Yeah.
was European, was calling Capcom instead of Capcom, and I'm like, you haven't seen anything else on space.
Because they were clever enough to go to a talent agency to get these Japanese actresses, but they said, fuck it. I mean, we speak English. We don't need to get English. We don't need to get American actors. We speak English. We can pronounce Houston. Come on, let's do it.
Which has been my problem with it throughout the entirety of the series so far, that there are each movie seems to have at least one person who is blatantly dubbed over or has such a horrible accent that it's worth mentioning.
Well, no, and it's funny because eventually we'll get to Pierce Brosnan, and we have Jack Wade, played by Jodan Baker, and it's just like, hey there, Jimbo! And you're just like, yeah, no, he's definitely American. There's no question here. As opposed to Felix Leiter, and he keeps switching in and out of English accents, except for, I guess, in Thunderball, which was a pretty good Felix. But here, they're like, at least we'll just get Japanese people, so if the accent's wrong, it's Japanese. It's fine. But all the American generals, even, they're English or Welsh. It's kind of awkward. Yeah. And they also called the Blofeld, we know it's Spectre because we've watched a Bond movie before, but the Americans are convinced it's the Soviets. The Soviets are saying it's not them, and then when their ship is captured, they're blaming the Americans, and we're almost on war. And of course, the only people who know anything are the English, and like, the Prime Minister is convinced it's not the Soviets.
At no point are we actually introduced to any evidence that supports that. He just says,
No, they just
not
have
the
a very
Soviets.
healthy
It can't
intuition
possibly be the Soviets.
that Americans can't possibly have this refined intuition.
And I don't know what room they're in. It's not the United Nations. It's just a room with, like, a sky dome of some sort.
And there are only 3 countries being represented. It's Russia, the UK, and the US.
And I love a world where the Soviets are okay with the British being the third-party neutral nation, but it's just the 3 of them talking at each other.
The UK was a mediator between the US and Russia, and that was it. That was literally it.
And they're just like,
because
the
of course.
space plane is not from the Soviet Union. That might be the most English person in this, except for when Q shows up and he's dressed like he's going to invade Japan. He has the khaki shirt and the khaki shorts and a pith helmet, and they're just like, oh man, oh Q.
This isn't Africa, come on.
I say, they don't even get their tea right here in Japan. You're just like, oh my word.
Racial stereotyping? Anyone?
Yeah, right? So, for those of you who are behind the scenes and have not checked the notes sheets online, afterwards we've been trying to outline this, and the outline of this movie is insane. After this, we cut back to Bond, and he's in Hong Kong. They're like, we'll get in touch with our man in Hong Kong. And he's in bed with a woman post-coitus, because he's sweating everywhere. Because it's the late 60s. There's still sweat on everything. She gets out of bed, pulls a lever, and it's a Murphy bed. It folds up. 2 guys come in with machine guns and shoot him.
That's right. It was very efficient.
Very efficient. It's like a half-second shot, and it's a great... Hell, it's great. They know Bond's going to try to bend everything. Yeah.
Honestly, it's better than Blofeld does.
Significantly.
It really was, honestly. They didn't lead him on. They said, that's James Bond, let's shoot him, and they did. And that's the end of the story.
And it's interesting because he is buck naked, presumably. We at least don't see him wearing anything.
He had a full suit on, honestly.
He survives this.
That's right.
We don't
know that.
We don't know this. We've seen a Bond movie before, and it's in the first 10 minutes. Although this would be a hell of a way to announce the next Bond. Right? If Sean Connery
he's Doctor Who, he just comes out as another person.
No, this was actually my thought. So I have not seen this film before today, and honest to God, because I knew Sean Connery had said during the filming of this that this was his last Bond film, and I had a very split second where I forgot that he was in the rest of the movie, and I thought, well, shit. They just shot him. This is how they do it. It's exactly, that's right. And they're going to cast him off into the sea, and then there's going to be a new James Bond, and it's going to be magical. But that's not what happens.
No, but that would be, like, again, we've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again. Like, he's not a Time Lord because blank. But if this is real life, it's a character that he plays. You know, there's always a 007, and his name is always James Bond, etc. And, like, if he dies, and then just a young, strapping Roger Moore's like, hello, my name is Bond my name is James Bond, and then M has like a whip. He goes, no! You say your last name first. It's Bond to James Bond. I'm so sorry. I'd like a martini that's been stirred. No! You're still wrong. So he's shot, and at this point, Hong Kong is still a British protectorate. So 2 British MPs, I guess, rush in, and they put their hand on his neck, and he's dead.
Good God.
Good God, man. Bond is dead, I say. And there's blood on the mattress, which presumably was not there before.
Which actually, reading up on this, probably shocked the audiences, because during the filming of this, they announced that Sean Connery wouldn't be coming back.
And that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And they see
so
that.
audiences coming in, I don't know whether or not they announced a new Bond in the meantime, but audience coming in knew Sean Connery was not coming back.
That's right.
I mean,
and we just saw him shot on
and maybe that's
film.
why it happened that way.
But I mean, it's such a neat scene because when he's shot and they pull the bed back down and he's bloodied and whatever, and the military police come in, they're like, well, he's dead. And the next shot is literally a funeral?
That's right.
At sea.
At sea. And it's not like Thunderball where there's just a coffin with like a JB on it. No. They're literally throwing a corpse into the ocean.
That's right.
The problem here, though, is we don't know why he survived.
They don't explain it, but they
No.
but this is the 5th James Bond film, right? We've established that he is a Houdini. He's a badass. It doesn't matter how he survived. He survived, right? It's a given.
Q magic.
At this point, it's a given, right? So as James Bond survives, and the audience says, "Okay, collectively,
the only thing
obviously,
on him
right?"
that does not have protection is his penis.
That's right. Is that right though? I mean, look, I've got written down that he slept with 3 women alone in this movie.
I got 4, so
We're-
it's
we're up-
entirely possible.
We're up to at least 20 at this point on
I got
film
2.5.
number
I
5,
don't know what you're
right?
talking about.
He's definitely got some protection down below, right?
Or he is like the typhoid Mary of some sort of new strain of gonorrhea.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
But somehow he survives.
Yeah, so they have him wrapped up in, I mean,
Gauze?
I've never seen
Mummy?
a burial at sea, but something, yeah. And he's under the British flag. They say the ceremony. They throw him overboard.
He sinks, and
then-
caught.
And then he's caught by 2 scuba divers.
That's right.
And then you realize... See, one thing I will say about Lewis Gilbert's song cues here, that's when you need the Bond theme.
That's right.
When the 2 scuba divers come up, although Bond does get the best line here, because then there's a submarine
I
that
love this
appears, they take him in a hatch, he's down below, they have this kind of... It's a box cutter, for God's sake.
they do. They
It's
cut him
like,
open with a box cutter.
They cut him open.
They do the
unzip him.
unboxing of Bond.
They unzip him. The unboxing of Bond.
That's right.
He's wearing his dress blues because he's a naval officer. He has a scuba mask on. They take it off of him. He kind of wakes up and goes, "Permission to come aboard, Captain."
My absolute favorite quote of the whole movie. He looks the captain straight in the eye.
And I mean, it's just like, because again, he's Bond, so protocol first.
That's right.
He's a perfect gentleman about it. And they're like, "Granted." It's just, it's so good. All right.
It does beg the question as to why they didn't just like take him below decks on the ship that tossed him overboard. Why go through the thing of mummifying him, tossing him down to a submarine, and
Why not have? It would have been so much more. Well, if it were a modern version of this same script, it would have been that. There would have been just it would have been a henchman that he killed from someone else, right? They would have dropped him out the bottom, and then he would have had a little escape pod that ends up on the submarine. But here, it's just like, all right, whatever.
let's just go with it. So he meets M.
He meets Em and Moneypenny, and both of them are in their military uniforms, which
That's
we
right.
don't see, and
Yeah.
it looks cool.
Yeah.
It looks very official.
It reminds you that this is not only a ship, but it's also their part of the Navy.
Yes, and they
British.
have
right.
so British. And Moneypenny has a desk, and when they get into M's office, it's still wood paneled.
Yes, it was.
It's still Bernard Lee,
Yes, of course.
being very like. And I caught this and pointed out to everyone. If you guys watch this, look at M's epaulets, because they're on a white field, and he has a skull and crossbones made out of diamonds and sapphires for eyes, and it's or rubies for eyes. It's cool.
Which seems awfully evil for someone like that, doesn't
I
it?
think the uniform was for, like, Blofeld. They're like, oh, shit, we don't have anything for Bernard. He's the only one who can fit this uniform.
I like to think that the actor added that himself without telling anyone.
That's right.
His wife's like, you should wear the...
She knitted it
crossbow."
herself.
It's like, I don't know, the director doesn't say, just do it. You've been in 5 of these movies so far. I don't know why she became
You're
a
the
man
star.
halfway through
Yeah.
my joke.
British. So he's given his mission.
He's given his mission, and his mission is to figure out this before the U.S. and the Soviets go to war.
Save space.
Save
It is. It's a very vague mission. It's not even. He doesn't even explicitly state stop them. It's just find out who's capable of launching such a thing, and then do whatever you do.
Because it's like we know they're coming down somewhere in the Sea of Japan, I think, or
That's
somewhere
right.
near Japan. And so they send him to Japan to figure it out.
That's right.
Hook up with the Japanese CIA equivalent.
But their suspicion is that Japan is not capable of launching such a thing. So the mission is, of course, to go to Japan and investigate, but they don't really know what they're looking for.
The only thing that they know is they need 007 because he's their, I guess, Asian expert, right? And he even says at Cambridge, or Oxford rather, he studied Oriental languages.
That's
so
right.
he doesn't need Japanese for dummies or whatever.
He doesn't need instant Japanese.
Instant
Right.
Japanese. And he lands and immediately is found out by Aki, right?
That's right. So Aki is his sort of
Liaison.
point of contact in
Yeah.
Japan, exactly. So he's the woman. He's the love interest eventually, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of neat. He ends up, well, I mean, like so many of these movies, they're in a new country. We haven't been to Tokyo yet, really. I think there's been some B shots that they claim were Japan and Dr. No or China. And, like, we've had B shots. This is actually mostly filmed in Tokyo.
That's
so,
right.
they even have a great kind of, it's like Midnight Cowboy, where he's just walking through the streets of Tokyo and they start panning up like it's New York, like Times Square. And
Right.
We just have the neon
You got
signs.
neon lights everywhere. And
This movie
flickering
brought
lights.
to you by the Japanese Tourism Board.
Yeah. Sony, apparently,
Yes,
too.
Sony,
because
yeah.
little TV screens embedded in everything say Sony. But he ends up first going to a sumo wrestling training house to meet his contact.
Because
That was a
Japan.
cool scene,
Yeah,
because
that was
Japan.
cool. Yeah, but that was very cool, very iconic. I would say
It was very neat. And then, like, the guy's like, he utters the code phrase and he goes, here is your ticket. And so he sits in the ticket box, and then that's where he meets Aki. And Aki's like, Mr. Bond, I love you.
Well, there was this awkward moment where he's looking at her and he doesn't know if this is the woman he needs to meet with, right?
Being
And
the
he doesn't-
'60s, it's a safe bet he expected a man.
That's right. And he didn't even know if this woman spoke any English. And he just kind of looks at her and awkwardly goes, I love you?
And he goes, I love you too, Mr. Bond.
That's
and
right.
You're just like, oh, it's so cute.
I'm so glad they ended up married.
And then they hop in her absolutely gorgeous Toyota 2000 GT and they will ignore the inconsistencies there and they take off into the night.
Which was awesome, because if you don't watch that scene too close, just look at the car.
That's
It's a
right.
beautiful car, but she switches seats several times.
Ignore the
mid-drive.
driver's side. It's fine.
And she has her hair up like a genie from I Dream of Jeannie, which I thought was so
God, she
fun.
did. And the thing over her
Yeah.
head, too. We'll just gloss over all that.
So after the first samurai match,
That's right.
they end up going to see Mr. Henderson. And Mr. Henderson is he's an English expat, right?
That's right.
What he's doing there is kind of obscure, but he's a contact there for MI5.
Right, not MI6, and Bond doesn't trust him because
Yeah.
the second he meets him, he draws his gun.
That's right.
When he sits down, Bond takes his cane and it hits him as hard as he can in one of
Right in the leg, yeah.
to make sure
That it's a prosthetic leg.
that it's the right contact, because it's such a weird, sketchy. Because if it were just Felix, he would have been at the bar. Felix would have come up and he would have pulled the gun and been like, "Oh, it's you, Felix," and no, this guy's This is Mr. Henderson, and so he has to almost kill the man with his own cane.
That's
Which is
right.
great.
Which is pretty consistent, I'd say, that he's testing this guy. This guy is apparently gone native, as you can tell from his house, his dress. He's dressed like a Japanese
But not completely
lord,
native.
I guess. Yeah.
Because he even has the line, "I've tried to go mostly Japanese, Mr. Bond, but of course, I can't give up everything English."
That's right.
He still has a 4-post bed and stuff. He makes Bond a cocktail, and as John said, he gets it wrong.
That's
which
right.
Bond graciously still accepts because it's been almost.
It's stirred, not shaken, right?
It's
Yeah.
and he goes, yes.
Russian vodka.
And of course, it's funny to me because you realize it's been minutes since Bond has had a drink, so he definitely needs something.
Whole minute.
It's been literally a scene.
Well, and then from there, of course, we have this neat kind of sumo fight with henchmen.
Because Henderson is killed.
Henderson in the middle is like, well, we don't think. I definitely don't think it's the Japanese. I think there's only 2 companies big enough to.
And there's silence.
And then silence.
And of course, what's happened to Henderson? Bond's got to inspect. Well, he's got a knife in his back, and he's died instantaneously. He can't utter the rest of.
That's what happens when you have paper walls.
That's right. Exactly.
And Bond hulks through every wall in this apartment.
That's right. He smashes through this wall. He finds the dude, tackles him. I think he kills him. I don't really remember.
He probably killed him.
But he puts the dude's clothes on. The dude is at least incapacitated.
And a face mask.
Bond has got his clothes on and his little STARS mask, and he finds the getaway car, and he marches on down to the getaway car and just kind of piles on into it and like covers his face and kind of goes, "Ugh, I'm in pain. Driver. Don't ask any questions. Just go to the chemical plant." So they do.
Yeah. Go back to the headquarters.
Quick.
That's oddly specific. Yes, the headquarters.
Go back to the evil lair. I'm in pain. So they do, and it's great. It works out wonderfully for him.
And it ends up being Tanaka, right? Was it Tanaka?
No,
it
it's
was
not
the,
Tanaka.
It was the Osaka Chemical Company.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Osaka Chemical or whatever it was, Bond, the guy carries Sean Connery over his shoulder.
That's right. Doesn't question his identity. Just apparently stops the car, opens the back door, throws Sean Connery over his shoulder without asking any questions, and just goes up 26 stories in the elevator.
Throws him down on the couch, and
That's
it's not
right.
until he throws him down on the couch that he decides to check the wounds, and Bond has pulled his gun on, and they end up with this great fight scene in an office where they're smashing into things. Bond hits him over the head with a Buddha statue.
Sean beats the hell out of him with a couch.
Yes.
I'm amazed at his immense muscle capacity.
And it's one of these things where there may have been cuts to a stunt double, there may not have been, but one way or another, Sean Connery is holding up a couch for probably half a day of filming.
That's right.
And it's great. He smashes a guy into a wall. Eventually, he comes back at him. In the interim, he picks up a statue, clubs him over the head. The guy still flips over, does another cartwheel, and then loses consciousness.
That's right.
Bond puts him in the bar.
Has a drink.
Has a drink, but it's Siamese vodka, and he's like, ugh.
Oh,
And then
Standards, man.
and he sees the safe and decides to break into it. Using one of the only gadgets we have that Q has not given him specifically, which is really neat.
this is a very out-of-the-box spy piece of equipment. Apparently, it requires no explanation. It's just a thing that you attach some sort of diodes to a safe, and it interprets the code, and he presses buttons and numbers appear, and the numbers are not relevant because it unlocks the safe on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he steals some papers that we don't know about and scoots the hell out while being shot at like a badass.
Like a badass. And you know what? It's neat because exactly what you said. We don't need Q to explain what it does.
That's right.
And it's a scene where Bond is being clandestine, so he doesn't speak a word. It just does what you need, and the camera does the rest. And it's something that rewatching a lot of more recent movies, you wish you could have a director that just trusts the audience. It was nice that he just said, you know what, they'll get it.
Yeah. There's no explanation needed for this. It's a thing that opens safes. Done.
And Bond doesn't have a watch that does it. He has a little gadget that fits. It's about the size of a cigarette case with tubes.
Because of course. And he carries it on him all the time.
All the time. But if you're a spy, frankly, of the toys he has, I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to a cigarette case later, which we'll get to.
Mm-hmm.
I did like that scene though because they had a very real moment, like a very you can. It's not often that you can relate to James Bond, but in this moment I felt like you could. So
Cracking into safes?
Exactly. So he's cracking into the safe. He's like 3 of 5 digits arbitrarily into this thing, and you sort of hear these patrol officers walking up and down the hallway very loudly, and he's got this moment where you hear them getting closer. And you can tell he's debating, do I stop this and kind of hide somewhere or should I keep going? and he just says, "Screw it, I'm just going to keep doing it," and the guys walk away. It's like this moment of relief, like, oh, I gambled and I won, and you're like, oh man, I wish I could do that. It's great. He just had this intuition that I can't have, but I can, because it was just a gamble, and it was great, and it worked out.
Then he opens the safe door,
and the alarms go off, right?
And the alarm goes off.
But it's fine. It bought him 3 extra seconds he needed to bust through the wall and get out of there.
And he looks in, and there's a bunch of, I guess, yen. There's a bunch of currency, and then a stack of papers. He grabs a stack of papers, as Steve said earlier. And then, of course, he knows that the security guard's going to come back. So he just hides next to a filing cabinet and then dunks out.
And then scoots out. It's fine.
Which is great, because apparently he's the only one who realizes he can just Hulk through paper walls, because he runs past a panel of paper walls and does nothing. No one shoots through them.
It's a very weird concept, isn't it? Apparently in Japan, all you have are like parchment paper walls and steel grate. Right. So, yeah, it's a very weird, stark contrast between the types of materials they use.
There's a support beam and then paper walls. And Bond just, like, walks through everything, apparently. That was great.
And he walks out the front door.
And he just walks out the front door. And then he's immediately captured by Aki again.
That's right.
In her Toyota. And then taken to another room. And she runs through the screen door just underneath, and Bond's chasing. Bond gets right to her. The floor drops underneath her.
That's right.
And then he ends up sliding through a slip and slide into a chair, a lounge chair, where he immediately lounges back just a little.
That's right. He knows he's been captured.
And a guy goes, "Well done, Mr. Bond, but you need to stop trusting a pretty face." And it turns out to be Tiger Tanaka.
That's right. It's Tanaka. You can't call him Tiger unless you're a close friend.
Right.
But Bond is immediately a close friend. So this is Tiger Tanaka.
They're basically the equivalent, like the British versus Japanese equivalent. He's the Japanese 007.
I have to say, Tanaka is actually, I think, my favorite. He's very similar to Q in many ways. And he's kind of the Japanese Q, right? But he's
the Japanese everything.
Yeah.
Which on one hand is neat, and I was going to say I give exactly what Steve is saying, because when we have the CIA, we have Felix Leiter, who is just another field agent. With Tanaka, we also have a Q. We also have an army of ninjas, because he has his own ninja training program. Which
he's everything. He's the Japanese Swiss Army knife. He's perfect for the situation.
And I've read Save the Cat. There is no trope about the third act ninja school, because there is a third act ninja school in this movie, which is baffling. It is pure bafflement.
Japan. That's all you need to know.
I love it, and we'll get to the scene. But there's one of my favorite scenes of the movie is this sort of like Mortal Kombat montage of training with ninjas. It was just perfect. I love this guy and everything he offers.
Everything he offers, indeed. So Tanaka tells Bond, after a loving long gaze, that he loves him. So Bond knows he's the Japanese field agent. And Bond hands over his papers and says, "Look, I don't know what I have here, because I grabbed it quickly. It just looked important.
And my intro to Oriental languages did not teach me how to interpret this piece of paper, so here you go."
Quickly enough, right? And there's a photo negative on it that they blow up. There's some information which Tanaka looks at, and he goes, it's just a manifest. This asks for milk and cheese and sugar and lox." He goes, "Lox is what the Americans call smoked salmon.
Or
liquid oxygen, which is rocket fuel. Look into that." It goes, "Very good, Mr. Bond."
Or it could be Lox.
It could be Lox.
At no point do they apparently discuss this. They just say, well, obviously it's liquid oxygen.
And my favorite part is, as the Americans call it, as though there's no Jewish people anywhere.
That's right. No, of course not.
I just love that. Anyway, moving on. But it was just this moment where the movie stopped dead, and I was like, wait, what? The Americans call it what now?
We've all heard of this, right?
Yeah. This is what comes from an obviously foreign entity making a movie and referencing Americans.
That's right. And we see the same inconsistencies with the car, but I digress.
We've seen how they treat American actors.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and again,
there are none, so they don't treat them like anything.
Yeah. Except Felix Leiter, who's usually like dubbed over or the weakest character or something. Yeah.
He's either terrible or dubbed over by an American later, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
But even the American guy who is supposed to be in Hawaii isn't wearing a Hawaiian shirt that's an aloha, like, Hawaiian print shirt. It's plaid. It's Scottish plaid, but it's cut like a Hawaiian shirt, and you're just like, oh, a costume person thought they were being adorable. That's so cute. Anyway, Tanaka gives him some information, and he realizes the best way to give me that information is when two men are naked together around 8 women. And so they go to a bath.
As is the Japanese way, which
They
we
do
are
go-
reminded of consistently.
There was this weird theme, and maybe you guys can help me elaborate on this or explain it to me, but it did seem like this weird thing where they had to go out of their way to prove that the Japanese tradition was very foreign and different from our own,
But equally sexual.
but equally sexual. and men come first, and our women are subservient and fantastic, and yours are not. And they had this weird notion of like the
Because
Japanese.
I think Tanaka comes out and says it, that in Japanese culture, men come first.
That's right.
And women come second, or they
it
serve
was like
second,
this
or
weird
something like
notion
that.
of tradition, though, and they have this scene where Bond has to get married to a traditional Japanese woman, and they have to
Which
go
we will
through-
get to, which makes no sense.
That's right, and they have to go through this wedding, but it's more about tradition than it is about
The mission.
the mission,
mission,
right?
yeah,
and it's just this
Well, to be
weird kind of
fair,
theme they carry.
Like I said,
on.
this is brought to you by the Tourism Board. This is
Right,
like
exactly.
introducing Japan to the world.
That's
and
right.
I don't know how they were in the 60s, but I could imagine it took a good while to recover from the war. And Japan at this point would be a technological and economic powerhouse.
Right. And an important U.S. ally, because
Exactly.
the first Asian woman, I guess, we see is Chinese, the one
That's
who
right,
kills
in
Bond
Hong
at
Kong.
the beginning.
Mhm.
And Bond's first line, I think, is, why do Chinese girls taste different?
Why do they taste different?
Like soy sauce and fish.
But in fact, Bond's line is, well, I like both Peking duck and caviar.
That's
but
right.
They don't taste the same.
I love them both, but they taste very different. and she just says, "Oh, I'll give you the best duck you've ever tasted." And then he gets shot, I guess. So don't say that.
So you get for saying that.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's because she's Chinese. The Japanese women are treated slightly more respectably because he actually marries one, kinda. Kinda.
Which starts a trend, unfortunately.
But the trend is very awkward. Here it makes no sense.
No.
And here it's so bizarre. And
Which we'll get to. Which we will get to.
we have a list.
My God.
We have a section on our sheet that says quips. The first thing that the military... I'm just looking at it now. That's why I brought up the Chinese girls. But the MP who looks at him goes, at least he died on the job.
That's right.
Because he was in bed with a woman.
Pretty sure he died on the bed. But, you know.
Christ. All right. But yeah. So we get to this bathhouse with Tanaka. And there are 4 women for each of them to bathe them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're supposed to be naked. But luckily they're not because the water is completely transparent. You
Yes,
see
it
Bond's
is.
swimsuit throughout. Which is lucky because the women would have been naked and you'd just been like, is that a nipple? I think it was a nipple. And then Bond gets to select the woman that gets presumably to have sex with, but it turns out for a massage. It's a very awkward scene. But the whole time they're talking business. And you don't realize... And so my question was, is this a Japanese Secret Service safe house where they just get rub-downs?
Yeah, that's
mean-
absolutely right.
It has to be.
It was, though. I mean, this was the Japanese Secret Service, right? And,
Yeah,
and
it's
Tanaka was the
Tanaka's
head of
guy.
it. So
Can you
this is all-
imagine the bathhouse girls like thinking, "This is my step toward independence. I'm a self-serving woman. I'm giving an English agent a rub down."
Right?
It sounds so awkward, but honestly, in the 60s, right, that may have been the mentality, right?
Well, I mean, I'm just
I
trying to think of
guess.
the British equivalent of this, where there was just a bar where there, you know, because there's not an English bathhouse where, you know, Liverpudlians are like, crikey, you're all stinky. Let me rub you down, Mr. Bond.
Don't touch me. Typhus Deirdre.
I mean, like, but that's why, like, so in case you guys missed the opening credits, this one's written by Roald Dahl. And so, like,
Which will destroy your image of Roald Dahl forever.
well, to be fair, Ian Fleming wrote the script for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, so
It's a trade-off.
it's a
Yeah.
trade-off. But I mean, like, I imagine that's what the British equivalent is. It's just, you know, it's an MI5 or MI6 tavern where they're just drinking cocktails and
Yeah, the Brits would be drinking.
Yes.
And the Japanese are apparently in a bathhouse.
That's right.
And the Americans are apparently wearing tweed suits in Miami, Florida.
The Americans will be playing golf.
right. So it's either Thunderball or Goldfinger. No, it's Goldfinger. Either way, it's still Goldfinger. That's right. That's exactly what it is. Playing golf in Kentucky. But long story short, after a massage, Aki replaces the masseuse, and so you have a love interest, kind of, who's much more interested in the Bond than Bond is in her, because the second she dies, spoiler, I guess, Bond's like, well, time to find another woman to marry.
Yeah, and this is what I mean by the sort of going through the motions and being cliche about being Bond. And I feel like we're kind of glossing over a scene that's coming, but that's what it is, right? Like, she dies, and it's just it's like so nonchalant. Like, all right, screw it, she's dead. Let's just continue with the story. This happens. It's happened before. It's going to happen again. You know,
It's very Bond.
It's very Bond.
Well, and if this series of Bond movies is completely sequential, right? Like one after one. Like, this is the 8th woman he's been with who died immediately after, or tried to kill him, and then he had to kill her.
Right.
So at this point, he's just completely like, well, I guess she was next.
This stuff just happens, and we accept it.
Yeah. So we should get through a couple scenes pretty quickly. He goes back to the chemical factory, this time as Mr. Lawrence? No, Fisher.
Mr. Fisher. That's right.
Fisher.
Because there are boats involved, so Fisher works.
And he's trying to get some intel. He's posing as a prospective client and trying to get some chemicals.
Wow. So his name was Fisher. I thought it was Lawrence, so it's Lawrence Fishburne. I'm like...
Fisher, fishing for information.
Yeah. And he ends up meeting with the head of Osada Chemicals.
That's right.
And it's this old guy who looks like he belongs to be... He is kind of, I guess, the henchman, sort of. He's the one who's the Japanese counterpoint.
Well,
right?
he's actually Mr. Osada, right? And he's like kind of the main henchman.
And this is a weird movie because Blofeld... There's not a Blofeld scene where there's the table of villains and he's like, this time you're going to take on this mission, whatever. No, Blofeld's there the whole time. He's just the Japanese point person Osada is.
Right.
Yeah, we never actually meet Blofeld until 3/4 of the way through the movie.
We meet his cat about halfway through the movie.
That's right.
Right.
Up until this point, we don't actually know the plot. We don't know what's going on. We know Osado is the face of it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's just this chemical warehouse, or chemical factory, rather. And Bond realizes that they're the only chemical factory that has the capability to make rocket fuel.
Lox?
Lox, right.
Fish.
And Bond pretends that he wants to make MSG and, like, vitamin C or something.
Yeah, ascorbic acid.
And he's like...
I imagine in the 60s that was high tech.
Exactly. People didn't know what ascorbic acid was back in the 60s.
Or MSG.
Or MSG.
That's right.
Monosodium glutamate.
As it turns out, the Asians export that.
Yeah. in mass quantities.
And everyone here is watching Bond. Like, they have typewriters that have, in the middle of them, rather than the reload, they have a camera that's
right.
Watching him.
They've got X-ray cameras on their typewriters.
And there's a joke here at Japanese efficiency, because they're like, oh, Mr. Bond, you're 3.5 minutes early. And then 3.5 minutes later, the helicopter lands.
That's right. Exactly 3.5 minutes later.
And he has a white secretary who will become a love interest for half a second, because, I guess, plot.
Because she's a white secretary.
Because she's a white secretary, and she's Blofeld's number 11?
Yes.
Right?
That's right. And they don't explain. She's just the redhead that
the problem with this movie,
around.
we talked about how there's a problem with over-explaining. And as someone who rewatched the Star Wars prequels recently, there's a real problem with over-explaining. Here, they don't bother to explain a damn thing. And about a third of the scenes have no dialogue at all.
No.
Part of me likes that. But then part of me thinks, if you're not going to have dialogue, at least have it make sense. This movie did neither.
Well, and it's something that we've, especially in 60s and 70s filmmaking, there is a lot of dramatic pauses, and clearly the most important thing is the visuals on screen, which is nice. This movie is beautifully shot, and when we get to, I guess, the final level, which is this island with a volcano on it, every shot is spectacular, with a few exceptions that are poorly rear projected.
Okay, so they're like one scene that they reused 3 times they should not have, but
and
really,
the woman on the boat. Remember, she's on the boat opposite Bond, and like she's has this long black hair and a white bikini,
and behind her you see the seam of light from whatever she was actually sitting in when they
That's right.
projected the scene behind
Let's be
her.
honest, though.
Yeah.
For 1967, in general, this
Again,
movie
beautiful.
is gorgeously, beautifully directed. You know, the special effects are honestly 9 out of 10 times are gorgeous.
And there aren't that many of them, really.
And really, there aren't that many of them. You
It's
know,
practical effects
it really
where they
is
have
a
it.
good-looking film for this time period.
Totally.
And really, the special effects blew me away, honestly, all
Well-
things considered, except with a few exceptions, of
Yeah.
course.
Well, and you know, this is, I guess, slightly affected in my head because the original Star Trek came out in '66, so this is a year in. And
Yeah.
so they're like, space is big. The space stuff is better than some Star Trek, but the scenery, well, you guys need to watch original Star Trek to see that the humor's gone. The fighting is the exact same.
They tried to make it. They tried to Hollywood it though. Like
Yes.
they took the weird, dramatic, sort of play aspects of Star Trek, and they made it like a real film, and
Yeah.
they made it look good. Kinda.
Well, because instead of Hollywood, it was Pinewood.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
it.
which is classy that way.
It's classy that way. And so after we get to the chemical factory, like I said, there's cameras everywhere, and one of the cameras is an X-ray camera. It sees in Bond's pants he has a gun, so he's the bad guy.
That's right.
After he gets the information, Number 11 realizes, and Osada realizes that
Osato
he's
realizes that's right.
right away that he's something. If at least he's not Mr. Fisher.
He's not who he
He's not
says
who
he
he
is.
claims
yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
Bond goes down to the docks, to the shipyard, and with Aki, and they're looking around. They're trying to figure out what's going on. What ends up happening is Bond snoops a little too long in this shipyard, and all these kind of longshoremen come after him with bits of metal.
That's right. They all come in with
As
wrenches.
longshoremen do.
Every single one of them's got an Allen wrench, and they mean business.
And this is one of those weird scenes, like a kung fu film, where
It was.
had Bond had another clip, he's literally just eventually overrun because he's just shooting people. One shot kills. There's just literally too many of him to shoot in the face.
He was so efficient, though.
He ends up on a ship with Number 11, who sort of pretends like she's seducing him and that she's in love with his. After opening a drawer filled with surgical tools, cuts him free, right?
That's right.
They end up on a plane together, trying to escape.
Right. So you think that she's
You're missing
escaping
where
with him.
he cut her dress off.
He does
He
cut her
did,
dress off.
Yeah.
and he uses the same dentist equipment
Right.
that she threatened him with to cut her bra straps so that they can, have some
Which is
sensual
number 3
time.
on my Bond 00 count.
Oh man, it was.
Yeah, I
was
think that
classy.
counts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that counts.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. The implication.
He used
is
the
not
torture
subtle.
instruments to double her.
Seduce her.
Yeah.
That's right.
They end up on this plane trying to escape to Europe, right? The idea is that they get back to Europe, but she tricks him and hits this weird button
In a
after
plane.
she's putting on lipstick,
That's right.
but on the lipstick there's this like bomb, and so she hits the button that first ties him down because it's a single biplane, right? Like it's the smallest
That's
little
right.
plane, and he's a giant man stuck in the back seat, and this bar comes across and just pins him in place.
Now, by bar we mean a 2x4 basically comes down.
Yeah. Yeah.
A literal 2x4. And
Where this was hiding, we don't know.
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense based on the fuselage because literally there must have been a third wing temporarily sticking out that comes across his waist.
Don't worry about this.
And it only would have worked if Bond's hands were down.
Which they were.
they
And he was
were.
Immediately.
scratching the top of his head. This would not have worked. But it's like, he's a gentleman. He never would have scratched.
This is what she was applying makeup, waiting for the right. She was looking in the rearview mirror, like, all right, his hands are down. Click.
He has a wig on anyway. It's held into place with the strongest.
Shh. We don't talk about that.
Clearly. But she jumps out of the plane and parachutes away. The plane is filled with smoke and is starting to crash towards the ground. Bond gets one arm free and then karate chops,
The 2x4.
and he gets free.
That's right.
He pulls up, but only enough to land softly enough for him to escape.
Lands softly enough for him to escape, but not softly enough to avoid the plane exploding.
Which happens half a second after
That's right.
it's off screen. At which point, he tells Tanaka to send Nellie and the old and
Little
her
Nellie.
father.
Little Nellie and her father.
And at this point, Q enters the movie, which
Thank God.
was a breath of fresh air. Because at this point, had the movie not taken a pause, you realize this is the most absurd movie, and we just survived Thunderball.
That's right.
This is when you really start thinking, as we were, that just kill him. Just shoot him. Drop him down a shaft. Just, like, do something to him. Not take him up in a plane using a double deuce kind of thing, trying to seduce him and then jump out. And no, just kill him.
Absolutely the most roundabout way to kill a spy.
Do something.
Like, the honeypot doesn't even make sense. Like,
why would you have a plane that has a thing that goes across it and then you'd have to jump out of it? Just take a gun and shoot him.
Well, and again, with Goldfinger, it's weird because it makes no sense, but at the end of the day, Bond is able to get information because the idea is that Goldfinger want to watch him die. Like, literally has this hatred for him that it wants to watch him die. Here, she jumps out of the plane. It's the most protracted for no reason.
That's right.
It's atrocious.
Watching that plane crash into a mountain and explode, though, for her would just be something else.
It's like a Xenia on the top kind of thing. Where she gets off on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although she meets her end in a fantastic way, which we'll get to in a second.
As only Bond can supply.
So, as we mentioned before, at this point, Q, Desmond Llewellyn, is maybe in his 50s.
And you know this
He's looking it.
And so you know this movie is taking place in the 60s because Q shows up with, like, 5 enormous briefcases, clearly full of metal. Like, he must have taken his own plane, right?
And
diplomatic bag.
That's right.
And I love it, too, because it's not like Japanese people, it's Englishmen wearing khakis. And the English here are wearing like knee socks and shorts and
and sandals. And they're wearing sandals.
And when they're in the Navy, they're wearing whites, but here they're on land, so they're wearing khaki. And they're bringing in these 4 large but not huge leathers, like trunks almost. Mm-hmm. And when they open them, they're not filled with anything like clothing. They're filled with bits of metal. And we get this cut action scene, which is like cut motion animation, like where they're assembling a helicopter.
Very like Phantom Toll Booth.
Everyone's got these models. Everyone's got one, right? Where you've got a square of plastic and you got to like twist these pieces of crap out until they break out, and then you put them all together. That's what they had in a briefcase.
It's early IKEA.
They put together an attack helicopter out of pieces of crap out of a briefcase. It's amazing.
And I wanted
you just want Q to be looking like, I have all these extra pieces.
And then, that's what I said. And then the 5th guy runs
they
up
sent
right
2
as
engines.
Bond takes off, and it's like, oh shit, this one's just filled with all the bolts. I wanted the A-Team music to be playing too. Dun 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 dun. Like,
but they build a freaking helicopter from a briefcase, which is both interesting and unlikely.
And this scene is weird to me because it's a little disappointing because you're used to seeing scenes with Q where he's down in some basement and there's target practice going on and flamethrowers and all sorts of weird things. But that's not what happens. They assemble the helicopter. He tries it out. And they move on. But you do get this scene later on with ninjas, and, of course...
Well, right, and I was thinking the same thing, because we've had this scene 3 different ways after this movie, and this is movie 5, so that's incredible. From Russia with Love, we have it where Spectre has the training camp.
That's right.
And then we've had, in both Thunderball and Goldfinger, we've had the Q training camp, effectively. And here we have the ninja training camp.
I love the ninja training camp.
The ninja training camp is
my
the best.
favorite.
My wife looks over and goes... I went throwing stars and how to use them. And I'm like, well, we just have to turn away from the neighbors who still live in the house. Yeah. But yeah, Q's only seen here other than being sweating and very uncomfortable because he's wiping his brow constantly.
And irritated because he was sent to Japan last minute with this briefcase full of helicopter.
Yeah. This is possibly the most pissed off at Bond we've seen Q, and he is furious. And he's like, and he has 0 time for Bond. Right? Like, he's like,
I'm tired of your shit, Bond. Take your helicopter and get out of my sight.
And we don't get a watch. We just get Nellie. And Nellie is this double prop, but made out of bicycle parts helicopter that has flamethrowers, miniguns,
rocket launchers,
and 2 missiles.
Right.
Anti-air missiles, machine guns.
Weren't they also, like, heat-seeking missiles?
Yes, because they definitely take down at least 1 helicopter, if not 2 of them.
Which we'll get to very shortly.
Yeah. and I know we're going slow here. It's because the second half of this movie makes zero sense. At least this part we're tracking.
It's par for the course, really. It may not make complete sense because we don't know the plot, but we're just following along.
Logically, it makes no sense, but if you follow just the action and none of the logic, it makes perfect sense at this point.
Well, and the speaking of nonsense, if you're casting a movie for Sean Connery, who's a tall, very svelte man, make sure the stunt double is the same weight range, because when they kept cutting back to the helicopter, he was wearing the same outfit, but the guy was clearly 150 pounds heavier than Bond, and I know we're going to get on our comments. Well, maybe the wind was just blowing in his shirt. Well, then strap down his shirt, because when they cut back to Sean Connery, he's clearly on a soundstage, and he's just looking as svelte as ever. So it's really...
perfectly coiffed hair.
Good.
Yeah.
When he gets underwater for that second, and you can tell it's a wig, it's a sad moment. Anyway, so Bond goes and flies to investigate this volcano.
That's right.
And for some reason. Because they I guess they identified the location that a picture was taken.
Well, so all they know is that this thing crashed in the Sea of Japan, right? So that's their lead, and they're investigating this island.
Well, there was a picture. There was a picture.
Was that he stole from Osada's thing.
Yeah.
It was a photo negative, and he recognizes that there's a ship called the Nanping, and then there's these pearl divers and a coastline, and they identify the coastline. And so Bond's looking around, and frankly, it's a fairly rural area. There's not a lot of anything. It's a very mountainous, and there's a volcano. So Bond is just flying overhead. The only notable landmark is this volcano, and in the caldera, there's this turquoise basin which looks like water. That's all we know. But then 4 evil helicopters show up, and we know that they're evil because they look like all other helicopters, but everyone inside is wearing all black.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And they have machine guns and missiles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because...
And if they hadn't have shown up, he would have just gone on his way.
This
is like bullshit henchman 101,
Ignore him.
Everything about what they're doing just defies common sense. That if they hadn't have attacked him in his DIY helicopter, he would have just gone on, and they would have thought, there's nothing here. Oh, well, let's move on to the next island. But no, they attack him, and he has to defeat them, but now they know there's something there.
There was nothing noteworthy until five attack helicopters showed up.
Exactly.
And the only way you can attack him is pull the GoldenEye, where you launch a missile at him, right? Because that's how they shoot the plane down in Cuba. Mm-hmm. That would make sense, because he would never have seen it coming, and just a surface-to-air missile taking him out. But here he's just like, my word, I'm on the right track.
Gasp.
I don't want to uncoif my hair.
And in his IKEA copter, he manages to fend off all 4 of these helicopters that got the drop on him.
All of them.
And then flies away. But unfortunately, by the time he lands, the Russians have launched their missile. And
because apparently they, like the Americans, are on a timetable that cannot be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're going to show the Americans that they can be fine.
That's right.
But they can't be. And so the Soyuz capsule gets captured.
Mm-hmm.
And so they immediately blame the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Because the same thing happened to you, so obviously you're doing this.
No.
Well, there was even a scene where you cut back to the Pentagon and the American Council of Space is debating. The Russians just had a vessel captured. Did they capture their own? Are they trying to create this kind of elaborate facade where they're not the bad guys? And so you kind of go from there where there's this weird. So the audience knows, obviously it's a third party. The Americans know, obviously it's the Russians. They're capturing their own ships to make this seem like a more realistic situation.
Well, this would have been better served, I think, like they do in later movies, where they show the Russian counterparts.
That's right, which they don't.
In later movies, you meet the Russian equivalent of M, and you see how they're dealing with this sort of stuff.
Well,
in this, you don't see that.
Well, and it's weird, too, because this is after the Cuban Missile Crisis, so, which, I know, history nerd, but... You get the red phone, right? Like the MacGuffin of the red phone. And so you'd think here they would be talking to KGB, because we've already even had 2 movies ago from Russia with Love, where you have that meetup moment. I don't know.
Where there's that détente.
There is the détente, because, and it's weird, too, that Bond doesn't immediately think Spectre and has to convince M, right? there's clearly a chaotic third party.
At no point is Spectre even mentioned until actually, I don't know if they are actually mentioned.
They mention it once.
They mention it once.
Okay.
Once it's clear that it's actually Spectre, and of course,
This is during the hot tub scene, by the way.
Well, of course.
Or-
Yeah.
well,
That scene where we were paying
Hospital
rapt
scene.
attention.
That's right. No, Spectre's capable of it. Gloss over those details.
and
move on.
it's been a while since I've been shopping for bikinis, but I've never seen granny panties. But those women have never worn higher waisted underwear.
They did. They had the very stereotypical. Like they had the
They had like
Traffic
satiny
cones.
tops,
Yeah.
and the cone bikini top,
with the very pointed bras. Exactly.
and then panty bottoms that went above their belly button.
Yes.
It was
It's the 60s.
easy breezy, beautiful color.
Cover everything, girl.
I can't even. The producer stopped even listening to me talk. I wouldn't be shocked if they stopped recording 10 minutes ago. She's just. And so Bond flies over the volcano caldera and realizes something's there. He's starting to think, well, we need to get to this one island. And I don't know what's exactly happening with the island. He's not sure.
But they just tried to kill him, so...
But that's where he has to
Interesting,
look,
yeah.
right? He's like, something weird's here. He goes back to Tanaka, and Tanaka thinks, well, we need to train you like a ninja. And you're just like, what movie are we watching? And the movie
Yeah.
apparently that we're watching is a ninja movie.
That's right. So Tanaka introduces Bond to his Academy of Ninjas, ninjas from new and old, and we get a fabulous montage of ninjas training in the traditional sense, you know, beating each other with sticks and doing Japanese push-ups or whatever they do.
And in fact, you should pay attention here because it's all foreshadowing for the final fight. Because every sequence
is.
we see, whether with swords or throwing knives, is done immediately at the end of the movie.
That's right.
With probably the same actors doing each role. Whatever. They do give... Bond's like, we should go attack the island right now. He goes, no, not until you're trained like a ninja.
No, a few more days.
Which Bond immediately accepts, which is fine.
Even though we're on a deadline here, since the Russians launched their satellite, and we know the Americans are soon to launch their satellite.
But we have to wrap up the montage, or you're not ready.
It's a good thing we had a montage, because we wouldn't have enough time for all this
That's
stuff.
right.
Because this movie could have been a tight 90 minutes, but they decided, you know what? We should
Ninja
double check.
montage.
But
Yeah.
they realized at this point, hey, we had Q in the movie, but we haven't had this sort of technical introduction to all the gadgets part, sorta. And this is where we get it, and I love this part
Yes,
because
I do too.
you know they go because Tanaka says, okay, well now that you've had an introduction to these classical ninjas, you know, let me introduce you to some modern ninjas. And they go down to the basement, and there are guys shooting target dummies with guns, and Tanaka's got to introduce them to the fancy RPG bullets that he's got, and
they look kind of like a mixture of there's a certain kind of shotgun, and someone's going to correct me, but there are these. They almost look like blunderbusses.
Yeah.
But they're still shaped like Colts, and then there's one that's shaped like a wooden handled shotgun, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But they fire what they call rocket rounds.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
They got little holes in the back where the rocket fuel comes out,
And
makes the bullets go faster.
and including a series of cigarettes that you light
That's
them,
right.
and then you wait 5 seconds, and a little rocket shoots out, which is pretty cool.
Which begs the question, where the hell was Q?
Yeah.
He had one job. He could have FedExed that helicopter,
Yeah.
and then he just pieced out.
Yeah, there was some weird distinction they had to make between Tanaka and Q in this movie, and that's where they drew the
Tanaka's
line.
infinitely better, apparently. Yeah.
I'd rather be in Tanaka's army, frankly, and there's a better chance of survival by
Yeah.
the end.
Better than old guy with liver damage than, Tanaka. Yeah.
I love that idea, though. Like, it's like, Q, Mr. Bond, at your request, I've made a slight adjustment so every vodka tastes like it's from Russia. It's like a little filter. We call it a Brita. But midway through the ninja training, Bond decides to bed Aki, and
This is where it gets really weird.
So he's getting immersed into Japanese culture, which means including their women, of course.
and in fact, before the women, other women come, they wax his chest so he looks
Yeah.
more Japanese.
That's right.
Because we need
Yeah.
to have Bond in yellow face for some reason.
Just cuz?
They give him the kind of, I guess, bowl cut and slick his hair down. So
He looks very Romulan?
I have to say that's actually a goddamn good point. But honestly, I think they did a good job in 1967 of avoiding the kind of blackface thing they could have done here.
They go with yellowface.
Like all they did was put a toupee on him. I mean, they didn't really.
They shaved his chest.
They put like some weird like eye thing.
Waxed his eyebrows.
But it wasn't like it wasn't anything like overtly racist. It was just like we put a black toupee on him and shaved his chest, and now he's Asian, kinda.
And he married an Asian girl.
That's right.
So he's obviously Asian.
Yeah.
You say they shaved his chest, but the next day, or presumably the next day, we see him without a shirt on and his hair's all back. So
To be fair, he's Scottish.
yes, okay. No. Credit
He's
right.
burly like a briar bush. It's just how they come.
So, after being turned into a Japanese, I guess he's supposed to be a fisherman later. They say.
Yeah,
For
he's
some
sort of
reason.
He's a native of this kind of remote Japanese
But
island where
why?
this base happens to be.
Why? They could have just come in on helicopters and dropped him and said, find out. But
Because-
instead,
Ninja way.
he has to...
That's not the ninja
He
way.
marries Aki, who has no connection to this
No.
island.
He marries another woman who's pig-faced.
That's right. Yes.
He,
Pig-faced woman.
he marries Kissy, who's the pig-faced woman, who didn't really look pig-faced at all. So,
Just cuz.
She
But-
just had a slightly
Yeah.
turned up nose. I guess that's it, kind of.
I guess.
I don't know. It was weird. But
This is where the movie really falls apart.
yes,
yeah.
Well,
No,
sorry,
no,
it was
no,
a little
you're
before
right.
this, but yes.
No, because beforehand, at least it follows, and then you're like, why do you have to marry this woman? You've had
Yeah.
women that.
Why do you
were-
have to Japanify yourself?
Well, and you've had field agents before that you pretend to be, in a couple with, right? Why? And we say marry her, and you're like, oh no, it's a fake. No, they actually go through a ceremony.
They do. It's a real
He
ceremony.
actually marries her.
And my theory is that this is a weird adherence to sort of Japanese tradition where it's not about the mission, it's sort of about satisfying tradition for these people. So he gets married to this woman legitimately. We assume.
I mean, these aren't
legitimately.
Hawaiians. They're not like
No.
just a minor people. Sorry, Hawaiians. But, who
Sorry,
just
Hawaiians.
no one really knows. This is freaking Japan. They were an imperial power 20 years before this. Why do we need to go through...
This is very orientalizing.
Why do we have to go through such tradition just to get to the mission?
And it doesn't make sense. They were kicking our ass for a while in World War II, and then we come back. Like, it's not like this was a weird third party. This is an European equivalent.
This is a first world power.
Right. It's weird. And we missed the coolest thing in here, actually, which I really liked, which is how they killed Aki.
Oh, that's
The
right.
ninja breaks above, and he's in the rafters and has a string.
So we have another miscellaneous assassin here. There are lots of these in Japan.
And in fact, apparently, and Bond kills another one during ninja training, which we should get to. But Aki is asleep next to Bond, and they're spooning, and it's adorable.
Yeah.
But there's a little thread that comes from the ceiling.
Yeah, so this guy
and there's
sneaks
a
in the
drop
ceiling.
Of poison, and the poison follows the string. It's such a beautiful, simple,
It is.
and a very
Makes you wonder why they didn't do it on Bond.
well. No, they tried to.
They tried to.
but he rolls over, and she rolled like
But he and moves his head over at the last minute.
he has a whiskey fart.
Yeah.
And he turns over, and it kills her by accident, and he realizes that the poison will cause her to make noise. So he tries to bust out, and Bond immediately shoots him.
Immediately wakes up and shoots this dude right in the forehead, like
He
no
falls.
hesitation.
And he dies, which sucks because so far she was an incredible character.
Yeah, she was the strongest character. She was better than James Bond at this point, but she gone. So
Which is why she had to be gotten rid of.
yeah,
And we have one more Bond movie with Sean Connery, although this is the last one in sequence, and then we cut to another Bond, then we cut back.
Are we not counting
Never Say Never Again.
Never Say Never Again?
Well, but that comes much later, so
Well,
we'll get
yeah,
to that.
okay, all right.
But of his initial run, he has 6 movies, and this is the 5th one in order. And we can talk about him at the end, but in some ways, Bond seems to have learned a lot. Some ways, he seems to have learned nothing. The thing he seems to have learned best is how to forget women. Because
well, Tanaka
she
points that
dies,
out.
and Tanaka rushes in. It's like, is she okay? And Bond is doing the thing where you close the eyelids, And he's
Neither
like,
of them give.
She's dead.
Neither of them care about this. Oh, she's dead. Okay. Anyway,
Well,
2 more days. 2 more days of training. That's
2 more
it.
days of training. Bond's like, oh, fine, I guess.
Well, shit.
Well,
The paperwork.
You let her die. 2 more days.
Yeah.
And we're ready.
I will say, though, that point is neat because Bond kind of dies a little bit inside. And then they go back to ninja training, and some guy pulls a dagger on him out of a bamboo stick.
That's right.
Bond takes the bamboo stick and immediately eviscerates this guy.
Yeah.
And you realize, with the exception of the blood that Bond has at the very beginning, we don't see any other blood.
We don't. None at all. The whole movie.
And that blood is not coming out of Bond. It's just on the mattress, so it's rough. But after this, Bond gets married to Pigface, whose name is Kissy, who looks, frankly, more attractive than any of the other Japanese women who are being married off in that one scene, which is really weird.
Pigface Kissy's a babe.
Kissy Kissy Bang Bang?
Isn't Miss Kiss Kiss Bang Bang another?
Miss Kiss Kiss Bang Bang? Yeah, that's different.
That's I had a moment
but
there.
so similar.
It's one of those moments where you realize John might have done more research than I did, so I needed to double check, damn it. At this point, we go to the final island, and the whole third act takes place on this island, and it's a weird third act because Bond plays Japanese. He is in his yellow face outfit, but he's hunched over, he's squinting the whole time, he's wearing dressed like a fisherman. Underneath his fisherman outfit is a ninja outfit that's gray and not black, but we'll get to that later.
Because Japanese will accept you as one of their own as long as you squint. Apparently that's the thing.
Don't make eye contact with anyone.
John is being facetious, but apparently that's what the director thought too, so moving on. Anyway, long story short, they end up in Kissy's apartment, house, whatever.
It's her house. Her parents are dead. It's her house now.
Yeah, they make it very clear that she's alone, which is...
I'm all alone in this house. And then they sleep in separate beds.
They sleep in separate beds because she's all about the mission, and then Tanaka rushes in and says, "Bad news from outer space."
Bad news from outer space.
Don't you hate getting that memo?
Which is the subtitle of this episode, because that's the most amazing. And it's another one of these great day for night scenes, and she's so hard pretending to be asleep on this kind of mat on the floor. And then Tanaka rushes in and practically shoves her out of the way and goes, "Bad news from outer space." And she's like, "What?" The Americans have pushed up their timetable. The countdown is starting now. It's going to launch at midnight. Even though it's already the middle of the night, because apparently they didn't bother to tell them they're doing day for night. And so the next day they pretend to be pearl diving. Mm-hmm. In fact, she even comes up with 2 bags of pearls, and then they're like, "We're going to drift away to this one cave where people kept dying."
Yeah.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. It turns out to be a vent for the cave, for the volcano rather, but they've been releasing gas there to make sure people stay out. It's miles
Or was
long.
it like exhaust? You know?
No,
I thought it was exhaust.
Like
no,
rocket.
it's rocket exhaust. It's not actually fuel exhaust, and Bond
Either way,
realizes
it's poisonous.
Yeah.
But Bond somehow knows what it is. He says it's whatever, gas.
And this is one of those things, like, because again, we're making a list of things Bond knows. So in this movie, Bond knows Oriental languages.
Yeah.
He knows that sake should be served at 58.4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly.
Man after my own heart.
He knew to the second most significant digit.
Which goes along with his character that he knows more about alcohol than anyone has a right to do.
Because at this point, in fact, when he's in Asada, the woman's like, Asada goes, "Would you like some champagne, Mr. Bond?" He goes, "It's a little early. Aren't you afraid it will hurt your liver? Because champagne in the morning is worse than champagne in the evening."
Right.
But whatever. But it's a Dom Perignon 59 at the right temperature, and so Bond is like, you can almost see him like go flat affect. He goes, "Why, of course I have to have champagne at the perfect temperature, and it's a Dom in the 50s. My word." Dun 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 dun. Dun.
Look at Bond. So hard. If by Bond you mean alcoholic.
Yeah. And then regardless, we should go through, but there's something so cathartic about Bad News from Outer Space from Tanaka, who'd been training ninjas. Because again, if you were directing this movie now, there'd be maybe 2 guys. One who is from Japanese intelligence, who is all up on what's going on in space, and then one who's like a Mr. Miyagi type, who's like all in touch with the ninja. But he's both.
He's
like,
both.
He's arranging marriages.
He's M, he's Q, he's the agent in the field, he is everything.
They could only afford one male Japanese actor,
Apparently.
and he was the one. So they said, you know what? He's going to do everything.
Get him my Savile Row Taylor, because he's wearing a great suit, and then halfway through he switches into a gi, and you're just like, whatever, he looks great and he's doing it.
Because Asia.
He is possibly not only the best Bond ally who's been described, but for a non-Bond woman, he's probably the closest to Bond. You know, because Felix is his buddy, but Felix has, you know, he's the CIA operative. You know, he has his own mission he's doing. You know, here, Tanaka's just his buddy. You know,
Actually, Tanaka's rivaling Bond in his Bondness.
Which we don't get much. And
I think he
like
shoots way more.
Tanaka.
Yeah.
I think he assassinates way more henchmen probably at the end too.
Well,
And at the
Tanaka's
end, he
useful.
is
Yeah.
technically leading an army
He
of ninjas.
really is. He's in there leading the charge, shooting people in the face. He's
Of
doing everything.
ninjas!
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, Bond is in charge of some people in Thunderball, but they're all technically Coast Guards, so not really.
Yeah.
Really, Bond in this movie is just in charge of failing miserably at infiltrating this lair.
The only thing he does is at
He
the end,
finds it, though.
Blofeld
He does
captures
find it.
him, and he's hitting buttons. He lets Tanaka's army in.
He pays attention to which button blows up the what is it?
the
Bird
the,
one.
Bird one.
Bird one. Yeah.
The space plane.
The space plane.
God, we're
You know,
not
one
even-
of the few lines Blofeld says is like, "Make sure you don't touch that self-destruct
That's the
button."
self-destruct button. This is the other self-destruct button. I hope he wasn't paying attention.
Don't touch
but-
the button that opens the door.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let all those ninjas in.
And so after they realize that the cave, after they realize the cave
Oh my
is
god, that makes so much sense. This is written by Roald Dahl. It's for kids. It's supposed to point all this stuff out.
Can you imagine if you turn this around and he had written the script for a Harry Potter novel, which was like half Spycraft and half Harry Potter?
This is Charlie in the Chocolate Factory meets Bond.
James Bond and the Great Glass Elevator.
It made so much sense.
If you're wondering why the discussion has deteriorated, it's because the plot at this point also has. We're just trying to simulate
Our discussion, believe it or not, makes more sense than the plot at this point.
Because effectively at this point when they realize the cave is toxic, right? They realize this must be the place, so they just have to walk to the caldera of the volcano.
Well, it's weird
Yeah.
because they're kind of dancing around this point that, like, the audience now knows this is the secret lair, but they don't kind of come out and explicitly say, this is the secret lair. They have to kind of have that epiphany, like, we're just kind of wandering around this island. We've stumbled upon a non-active volcano with steam coming out of it. Maybe there's some suspicions to be arose.
Well, and I mean, at this point, we've seen bits and pieces of the volcano layer. Like,
Yeah.
for example,
He flew right over it.
and how did 11 die?
Don't worry about that.
Because it's pretty amazing.
I mean, it is pretty cool. It's very Austin Powers, actually, as we were
It
saying,
is so Austin Powers, and again, I had
which
not
is making fun of this.
I had not seen this movie prior to today, and I saw like the scene where they kind of had to establish, you know, this guy is the bad guy and this is his lair, and all I could think was, this is Dr. Evil. Everything about this guy ordered the kit, the starter's kit for being a supervillain. And, you know, had a guy come in feng shui, and he was like, do you think this is too many piranhas? Do I need more? Do I need a guillotine? Like, where do I stop?
Yeah,
Well,
he's got a
well,
moat full of piranhas.
It was awesome.
and a bridge
amazing.
across this moat.
Do I need another button that shoots nukes? I've already got two. Like,
But Mr. Blofeld, you got to remember. I don't know what this accent is. You got to remember, it's also a home. Would you like some tapestries and some Renaissance era paintings on the wall? Because
And some
there's-
comfortable 60s era couches.
I don't think the European masters are being represented in this cave. We need to step it up.
Because there's like a medieval tapestry.
There
You
was.
gotta feng shui this shit. Come on, guys.
Oh my god! And so after they fail to kill Bond, Osada and 11 apologize for their failure to actually kill Bond.
To mysterious head guy.
Yeah, to mysterious head guy, which we know is Blofeld because we see the cat, and we see, but why is it so mysterious? Because we see full on Blofeld later on. So
Because
this
up until this point, we have not ever seen Blofeld's
That's
face.
right.
We've seen the cat.
We know of him,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we've never seen him.
and so they're walking up this kind of like it's a ramp to a staircase, and Osada walks by, and then right as 11 gets over this bridge area, it drops away and she gets eaten by piranhas.
Because of course.
Because of course.
Again, you could just kill her, but no. Just
You have to
it's more
have
fun
this
this way.
wonderfully protracted attempt. It's as though they had lasers on their heads.
Oh my god, they did.
If
They
only.
totally did.
If only.
In the sloppy green swamp water. full of
Which, when it
piranhas.
foamed up, turned orange because
Yeah.
they couldn't show blood, I guess.
Why did I could not believe that they dropped 2 people into there and not once was there a pool of blood that
Well, and
bubbled
they
up
didn't
to
even do
top,
the
not even once.
PG-13 thing now that they would do in a Spy Kids sequel, which would... one of her high heels would have floated to the surface.
or one of the hands would reach out and then slowly go back into the water.
Sure.
Nothing.
Do something.
Or-
no, they
or-
disappear in a haze of
Yeah,
bubbles.
nothing.
Or if they
It was
had
just
like
bubbles.
a distinctive piece of jewelry like a ring, it would have floated.
Yeah,
to the, You'd have
exactly.
seen one little glimpse of it as it sunk back
Yeah,
down. Perfect. They even do that in the Naked Gun movie where the
Yeah.
guy has a ring that ends up in a hot dog. Moving on. It's amazing how many Bond movies there are that aren't Bond movies. But at this point, Bond ends up in the volcano.
That's right.
Kissy is sent back to get the rest of the army, right, of Tanaka's
That's
army.
right. Because he's recognized this is their base. Go get help. I'm going to strap on my spy gear and suction cut my way down into their lair and, I'm going to wreck some shit.
Wreck some shit.
Which is a daily thought for Bond.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It is.
They ripped me off for $3.75 at the local Publix. I'm gonna wreck some shit. It's just suction cup to the ceiling of a drop ceiling, and he's like knocking over boxes of kicks. Yeah, no, Bond is an asshole,
And so now we bring up he's wearing gray instead of black,
which is weird.
which is weird. But then you realize,
The
the
walls are
interior of this base is great. He knew it's perfect.
Somehow, yes. Just imagine him wearing like several layers, like
Yeah.
black, gray, blue, pink, red. Just
He doesn't-
whatever the scene
Whatever
calls
camouflage
for.
we need.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, Bond has officially infiltrated the enemy base.
Yeah,
And I guess he's just kind of trying to scope out some intel. He sees the monorails. He hitches a ride on one, and he finds our prisoner astronauts, which is wonderful. isn't
Next
it?
stop, prisoner
That's right.
station.
yeah. And he
They do it in
frees
Spanish too.
he frees the one American and 2 remaining Russians.
Yeah.
And we have a rare unit of detente where they kick the shit out of the remaining guys. They put on their uniforms, and this is a series of. I guess by this point the TV show Mission Impossible has come out, and like they're just switching into uniforms. They get into these, I guess, security guard grays. And, remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, if you're building the henchman layer, you need a volcano, you need some sort of pit of evil, but you want to upgrade to the premium package. So you don't just have one colored uniform, you have at least 3. Because every time
That's
you see
true.
people running around as extras, you have gray, which apparently is security troops. We learned this. We have the red, who are the engineers, and then we have yellow, who are miscellany.
Yeah.
And blue somewhere?
A few blue.
Yeah,
all
a few
highly
Those are in the
disposable.
command center, I
Yes,
think, right? Yeah.
Right.
And these guys are all engineers. They have no soldiers here. Everyone's got a hard helmet that matches their suit, and they've got guns though because it's an evil
Some of them
layer.
are scientists because you
Like-
see them in scientist jackets.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a degree in biochemical engineering, but here's a Glock because you never know. It's an evil layer. A
never
spy
know.
could bust in
Yeah.
at any moment.
Well,
I wonder what the Craigslist job posting is for something like this.
and then
Henchman wanted, must know
Do you like
biochemistry
drowning
and
puppies?
astrophysics.
Do you have a degree in physics?
Must look
you-
good in jumpsuit.
have you ever had fish and you had to feed regularly?
Do you have terrible aim? Well, welcome aboard.
We can train you.
I do like the idea that like Blofeld is there stroking his chin. And he's like, we should put the gray and the yellow shirts on Craigslist and the blue and the reds on LinkedIn. What do you think? Because some need to know how to do things, and others they don't.
They're just there.
They're just
We
there.
need some cannon fodder.
We need to have them at every height because in case Bond shows up, he needs to be able to be a 6
Which
foot
will
four.
apparently happen at some point.
He needs to be the tallest gray shirt ever. And then they go to visit the astronauts for the next mission.
No.
To intercept the U.S. ship that has just launched off, right? Bond and the 2 CIA agents knock him out, and then they move on. And when they move on, Bond puts on one of the astro suits.
Because they're going to sneak into Bird 1 and do something.
Yeah, my question is, what is he going to do
I don't
when
know.
he's in there?
They're going to
Just have one of the
sabotage
astronauts do that and just turn the thing around. You don't
Yes.
need Bond to do that, who
Well-
doesn't know anything about in space.
Well, and this gets into the bigger mission, which
Not
is
yet.
what's the point of collecting these? Because they not only go into space and disrupt the mission, which I guess theoretically the idea is to start a war,
Right.
but they also collect the space capsules,
That's right.
which make no sense.
So presumably, so they're trying to incite this war between the U.S. and Russia by, acting as this ominous third party and kind of blaming each other and capturing these vessels. But what do they do with these astronauts? I don't know. Once the war breaks out, they use them as ransom. We don't know. It doesn't matter. They're prisoners. It doesn't matter.
Well, and further, they keep the astronauts as prisoners, like we mentioned, but they also repaint the interception shuttle
Of course.
to be the opposite. So the last ship is supposed to be an American shuttle. So they're repainted it with CCCP, and it has
And a
the
star.
star on it, and you're just like, this is a lot more effort than you need because no one sees it. We
Because
see
we see their technology, and NASA is looking at these things as dots on
That's
the
right.
radar.
It's true.
That's it. There's no like visual or anything like
We
that.
don't track any sort of like frequencies or any beacons or anything. It's all strictly based on high resolution photos from space. Do you see that American flag? That's what happened. It
Which
was
is
the
even
Americans.
crazier because, like, at this point in history, they are actually using essentially outward space radar sonar
It
stuff.
is. It's space sonar.
So why not invent some sort of future technology? Because it's Bond. No one knows what's really going on, right? It's a visual. Why bother with that? But they still keep it as a very kind of real world. Like, this is shockingly real world considering how crazy so much of it is.
Well,
I do
it's
kind
the
of a-
beginning of the space race, isn't it?
It
In
is.
the
This is
60s.
Yeah,
67.
this is Cold
yeah.
War.
This is well on the height of the Cold War because like
Exactly.
you said, you just had the Cuban Missile Crisis a few years earlier,
Yeah.
and space is heating up as the next frontier, and this is the important part geopolitically speaking between Russia and America, and apparently space matters.
Well, and I mean, like, I get it's funny because when we had that earlier scene, they say, an attack on another spaceship will be an act of war, which I get because this is like a science race. There's not supposed to be really military involved, but they make it so very clear that there's this weirdness, right? Like, it's this kind of weird neutral gray area. I don't know. It's so fascinating. There's a lot more geopolitics in this than most Bond movies.
Probably not since From Russia with Love.
Yeah.
That there's people are thinking, like the Brits and the U.S. are thinking, well, what is Russia going to react to this? Which feeds into that whole Spectre thing of we want to cause World War III.
That's right.
And then pick up the pieces. And I think Blofeld actually said, we're going to be there to pick up the pieces after Russia and America nuke each other.
Well, and the ending of this kind of feeds into that because the Americans know that their last, Gemini rocket, they're calling it the Jupiter rockets, but this is 67, so it's Gemini, went missing. And what I would have loved to see is the populace trying to figure out, because, the Americans were super public about this, and we know that Soviet rocket launches never came back. And there's conspiracies as to whether or not there were humans, but you can look up what the Italians say about that because there's audio recordings. That's terrifying. That's another podcast.
Look into that.
Yeah, but like, so much of this is very public. The Americans were super proud, and so like the idea that we need to launch another one because people are going to expect a rocket to return soon, and we better have people on that ship. But so there's this fascinating geopolitics going on. And there's spies on the ground. It's so neat. And you realize that this is a terrifying trope. That when you're in space, you're so desolate. And if you haven't read World War Z, the book, the movie is weird, but the book has this aspect in it. There's even an X-Files episode about this where, like, what do you do if you're in space and you're trapped? Because Challenger is terrifying. And when I was going to college, John was in college, when Columbia exploded. That's a moment, and you realize there's complete vulnerability here. And this is something the movie acknowledges, that the astronauts have very little power here.
And you see that in the very beginning with the astronaut that gets cut loose. Exactly.
But at this point, Bond is captured. And he's in Blofeld's clutches in a way that we don't really see very often. Where he's there, and we actually have Blofeld
very
turn.
lax clutches.
This is probably the first time the two of them come face to face, right?
Yeah, because Bond is aware of Spectre and suspects Spectre because, in fact, in the last movie, he's the only one who really believes Spectre exists. He turns out to be right, and so here we have Spectre as Spectre being Spectre with Blofeld at the helm and the cat who disappears. He's the cat of invisibility.
When Blofeld is hit with the ninja star and retreats into his lair and comes back again with no cat. Don't worry about it.
Cats do what they do.
Yeah.
No.
He dropped the cat off and came back to blow up his lair.
But hopefully he makes it out because that layer is gone.
Yeah, that thing.
Layer be gone.
But yeah, they start the countdown for the new launch to take out the next rocket. It goes up and does its thing.
But only after Blofeld realizes his Bond is one of the astronauts and they have an alternate because, you know, he wouldn't need his air conditioner in space.
That's right.
Because Blofeld is on his game, frankly.
A dude's paying attention.
And the two of them meet for the first time.
They do. And Blofeld immediately takes his handcuffs off because, you know, you're in my clutches, Mr. Bond.
Right. I've surrounded you with non-armed guards. So do whatever you want.
Well, and it's
really pay attention.
And it's a weird version here because, you know, whatever it was, 2-3 movies ago, John, you introduced the idea of having the gentleman villain. And Blofeld here starts out as a gentleman villain. You don't need handcuffs. Mr. Bond knows where he is.
He's our prisoner. He'll behave as such.
That's right.
Would you like whiskey or a tea? And he goes, well, it's after 4, so I'll have whiskey. I mean, whatever it is. Like, they're playing the game together. And then all of a sudden, this is where it breaks down because Bond not only escapes using trickery, right?
Can I have my cigarette? Oh, sure. And this is a notion you would not see in a movie in 2016. Hey, can I have my cigarettes? Oh, there's no smoking in here. Are you
my
kidding
favorite
me?
is Mr. Osada thing is like, those are bad for you.
Yeah.
The nicotine will kill you.
You've already made a bad decision, Bond, and he sees the gun on the X-ray. Oh, the smoking will kill you.
And then he blows up the guy, and Bond starts some shit on his own. He's just beating up people. He grabs gun. He opens the lid just that little bit so Tanaka's ninjas can start slipping in.
That's right.
And he immediately gets redefeated and captured. And Blofeld's like, I'm not going to shoot you yet for plot reasons, but then we're going to move on to another room.
Damn, you foiled me.
Come
Get
with
over
me.
into the corner, boy.
And almost all the ninjas get shot immediately, but one stays up in the rafters to set a landmine off on the ceiling to open up a gap so that other people can snake through.
So the inside's more vulnerable than the outside.
And at that point, wave after wave of ninjas come in, and so we have henchmen versus ninjas in possibly the greatest Bond battle ever.
It was great.
I think so. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. In a volcano.
It was
In a
amazing.
volcano.
Volcano layer, ninjas rappelling for 5 straight minutes, throwing grenades. They've got ninja swords. They've got whatever. They've got guns.
They got
everything you can
grenade
imagine.
guns.
They've got everything they
Yeah.
need.
And the rocket is launched, so now the countdown is not to stop the rocket launch, but to stop the rocket from intercepting the American capsule.
Which is doing something.
Which is question mark.
Space.
Which is midway through question mark. And you realize that part 2 of this plot was, well, we could always make it blow up with the key that Hans has, which is a 9-foot-tall Aryan.
That's right.
I swear to God, he's wearing like one of those muscle suits where it looks like you've got muscles, but you don't really.
He is. And when
He'd be better off wearing a pillow under his shirt. He looks that ridiculous.
And he has 0 lines.
I love his character because you're right. They don't establish him at all, and they even, he's just this enormous,
him one of the best
menacing
developed in the
henchman. And when he's fighting Bond, they even have those absurd how can we make this noise sound just more firm and harder? Just his punches need to sound like just concrete smashing concrete. And that's what he is.
Well, and he's
12 seconds.
maybe 5 inches taller than Bond, which is already tall. But at one point, Bond gets punched in the gut first by henchman Hans, and so he's like bent over and he's trying to punch Hans in the gut. Which is, again, it's like, it's living steel. Like it's
futile exercise.
Like it's Rocky IV. But Sean Connery, who's tall, is bent over, so you don't even see the guy's face in screen. He's just huge. Which goes back, I guess, to Blofeld's henchmen loving Aryans, because everyone loves Aryans in this movie.
Of course.
And this guy's essentially a recurring character.
Yes.
That he's the silent henchman who's larger than life,
Yeah.
who can beat the crap out of Bond without saying a word.
Because it's the same character from With Russia With Love. It's as though he's recast every few movies,
And
like
from
M and
Spectre.
Q. Yes.
I mean, Spectre, we saw him again.
Yeah. I love it.
He's a guy who can take a punch and then deliver a cinder block to your face.
He's a very handsome Jaws, indeed.
And we haven't even gotten, like, again, you're right. Like, and I love it because he's recast the same way every other character is recast eventually.
Yeah. He's just the epitome of strong silent type. Very silent, very strong.
And then
Very
ultimately
Aryan.
we end up with Bond throwing him to the piranha tank, luckily. I mean, my God, if a black tactile neck floated to the surface, it would have been wonderful. Bond gets the key off of him during the fight, so Bond can run up to the control center with the help of Tanaka's ninjas, who have rocket bullets blowing up things. And
As you do.
as you do, and detonate the space capsule, which has a self-destruct on the ground.
A very convenient remote self-destruct.
As you do,
sequence.
of course. I mean,
Because you never know when things are going to go wrong, and you'll have to blow it up to protect your space.
And thank God there's not a delay into space, because otherwise you would have accidentally captured the space capsule and blown it up with that inside.
which Bond really didn't know was going to happen or not.
Nope, Bond just assumed. I mean, he's Bond.
Yeah.
Whoops.
I mean, how do we know that the Spectre ship blowing up didn't, like, perforate the air canisters on the American ship
don't.
and, like,
Because they
kill
were
them
within,
all?
what, 6 seconds? No,
Yeah.
sorry.
5 seconds.
5 seconds.
You'd think they would have been, like, pulled a Goldfinger and been a 007 seconds. Nope, it was 5 seconds because
2
Bond
seconds
screwed
more
us up.
dramatic.
It's been done.
Bond screwed it up by 2 seconds exactly.
He did. He fumbled with that a lot.
He
There
did.
was
I expect
some
more.
intention there.
Yeah.
And then we get into the weird final sequence in which Blofeld had kind of escaped Bond, but was apparently just on a tram ride.
Yeah, they don't really. So he pulls, So
He goes to a secret level.
Yeah, so he reappears and he unveils some sort of secret panel, and he pulls this lever, and it's like a self-destruct thing, and the base starts blowing up, and then he disappears, and everyone's escaping. They don't describe how he disappears, but he just kind of does. He makes his way out of there.
Which I mentioned at the time, actually. Props to him for having a self-destruct mechanism that is immediate.
That
Yeah.
doesn't have a timer. That's not like
It's practical.
T minus.
Yeah, T-minus 5 minutes until the whole place blows up.
Which is weird, considering him leading Bond on for 5 straight minutes, not just shooting him, but
Yeah, it's like, come with me, Mr. Bond. Okay, as I'm getting into the monorail, let me shoot you. This is
Yeah.
going to be it.
and let me
okay?
show you some self-destruct buttons on the way.
Yeah.
And we've had some not subtle guns in this movie, but this is the least subtle of them all. Considering at one point a limo just pulls up and starts shooting a bomb
That's
with the
right.
gun out the door before he even gets visible. Yeah, but long story short, Blofeld is escaping, sees, pulls a giant, the biggest of all levers,
The biggest lever of all.
and his cat is gone at this point, so God knows what happened to Mr.
Mr. Bigglesworth is going
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's the word I was trying to think of. I was gonna say, I would have just gone with Mr. Kleenex Bear later. It starts blowing up. Tanaka, his remaining men, and Bond dive into the cave that was previously filled with toxic, but not as now.
No. All the explosions took care of the gas.
They swim away as different things are projected in the background. Some are well done and some are not.
Explosions and lava flows.
This was the weirdest scene for me. There were some amazing practical explosions that were really, really phenomenal, on par with movies today.
Yeah.
And then they had the most atrocious looking, like, B-roll, shitty 67 CGI nuclear explosions coming out of a volcano that they had to recycle 4 times. It was just so weird.
And so you have this previously dormant volcano that's decided to erupt because of the self-destruct, which is clearly, National Geographic footage or whatever of an actual volcano erupting. And then somewhere else in Pinewood Studios, they just blew up some shit.
They sure did.
And then they spliced them together in some very awkward footage that, like Steve said, is cut back to not once, but twice. But there's 3 shots of this. Bond and Kissy and Tanaka's men end up on 30 different life rafts, all of which disappear except for Kissy and Bond on their own life raft.
Yeah. The raft of love.
And then we end up kind of sailing off into the middle distance as Nancy Sinatra starts to sing again.
And scene.
And scene. You know, Bond doesn't attempt re-entry until this guy directs another movie. Yeah. So
That pun's almost as bad as this plot.
this might be the most...
I think up to this point, other than Thunderball, this is just like, it makes no sense.
Well, Thunderball makes... If you take out the underwater stuff, it makes perfect sense.
Which is half the movie.
But that's what it is. It's like there's a second, like,
It's
whatever.
like if you take out the volcano scenes, this movie makes sense.
No, it doesn't.
It almost does.
No, it doesn't.
It almost makes sense.
But like,
you know.
but like, there's a second unit director on Thunderball who thought he deserved as much time as the main director,
Who apparently said, screw the script, I'm doing my own thing.
and it's going to be all silent, and there's not even going to be background music. It's just going to be people underwater in scuba suits. Here, there's nothing. It's just like there's someone dropped the script and then they reassembled it.
It just doesn't make any
I
sense.
think I got these papers out of order. Here you go.
So what do you guys think at the end? We're almost out of time here, but like, what do you think?
I thought it was a very, very highly entertaining movie. The effects were great. It was witty. It was very James Bond. And there were some senses that it kind of deviated from the norm. Like, the majority of the movie was recorded in Japan exclusively, which is a weird thing for Bond. But it was a great movie. Honestly, go watch it today. Honestly, it stacks up the movies today. It was a great movie. I loved it. I've got nothing else to say about it, really.
Wow.
John?
Yeah.
All right. Considering you said you hadn't seen it before now?
I had not seen it before, and I loved it. There were some cliche and weird scenes, but you expect that, right? The movie's 40 years old. It was fine.
At the time this was made, it was probably not cliche.
Yeah.
And
It may have been done
Yeah,
before,
you're
but
right.
it wasn't cliche.
It wasn't, not at all.
Yeah, this was a fun movie. Plot notwithstanding, which could have done some work, but the first half of the film, maybe the first 3/4 of the film, was genuinely entertaining, and the special effects were great. The Bond-isms were great. So overall, yeah, it was a good movie, good solid movie.
I will say I liked it. I think sometimes the weakest part, unfortunately, was Sean Connery, because like they had him, they needed him to do so much. And a lot of the times it seemed like he didn't care as much. And I don't know if that's because it's his 5th movie, and I know at this point he was pissed off at the Broccoli's. And like we said, he comes back for one more official Broccoli Eon production, but the next one he's not in.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, after this, he comes back for 2, only one of which is official.
Right, and he comes back for Never Say Never Again, which is opposite of Octopussy, and we'll do both of them when we get up to that point. But I don't know. Other than him... And again, he's fine. He's just, I think he was much more interested in the first few. This movie is weird, but fun. Like, unlike Thunderball, which had such a singular plot and was slow, this one was crazy and all over the place. And the plot is harder to follow, but it's neat. It's fun.
It's fine because these movies at this point have established some standards, and you can just defer to those when things don't make sense, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Why did he escape? It doesn't matter why he escaped. He's James Bond at this point.
He's going to escape.
Yeah.
It's almost to the point where, at least with this movie, Bond is irrelevant to the plot. He's
Almost
just there
so,
kind
yeah.
of to move it along, just to show the audience this is how these things go together because they have Bond together.
Exactly.
Right. He's kind of ecstatic at this point. Everything else is what's relevant.
Well, and at the end of the day, I think it's an interesting way to make a movie. But if you're Sean Connery and you want your Bond legacy to be something else, you understand why you'd come back for another movie. And I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've seen it. So when you guys listen to me, it'll be the first time I've seen it in its entirety in years. But I think Diamonds Are Forever is possibly one of the best he did, other than maybe Goldfinger and From Russia with Love, which on rewatching is amazing. However, we are out of time, but don't worry. When we come back in 2 weeks, Bond will return in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
That's what the movie said.
That's what the movie said. And don't worry, I get to say it too because I'm the host.